Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with News and Views on June 16th, 2016. And a brief word at the start here. I want to thank everybody for sending so many excellent articles the last 3 weeks. It's been absolutely amazing. I wish you all could see what all of you are finding. So I want to thank you for that. I want to thank everybody that has made donations for the book research. Really helps right now. Please keep that coming. I'm involved with kind of a heavy project on C.S. Lewis, and it's requiring some rather hefty purchases. But I want to get into today's information from the Moscow branch of the Nefarium, all right? And I want to do so by way of relaying a little personal story. Recently, someone sent me an op-ed piece written by an American expatriate that has basically become fed up with the growth of the American empire and the justification of doing almost anything crazy to provoke a war with Russia, which of course would be a very crazy idea. But in the piece, this gentleman pointed out that absolutely no way is Russia anywhere close to being a military match to the United States. And he falls back on an argument that I've heard many, many times, that Russia's defense spending is a drop in the bucket compared to America's. And we hear this quite often. And I want to address this at the end of this article, but I want to set that context up for you. I'm going to read this whole article to you. This is from a Russian news source. This is Russia Insider. And I want to read this whole article to you because there's one statement in it that really grabbed my attention, particularly in this context of, well, Russia can't possibly be a match for the United States military because its defense spending is, in a year about what the Pentagon spends in a week. All right, here we go. This article is titled, "The Russians Have Already Shot Down Numerous U.S. Drones Violating Crimean Airspace." And now let's read the article. Quote, "The war you won't hear about. Numerous American military aircraft, albeit of the unmanned variety, although with the possibility of being armed and dangerous, have apparently been violating Russian airspace, leading to the Russians shooting, yes, shooting them down, following the refusal of the Americans to acknowledge Russian diplomatic notes of protest. The military violation of the territory, including the airspace of a sovereign state, is ordinarily taken to be a casus belli, an act of war. But to be fair to the Americans, they may justify their belligerent behavior, flagrantly refusing to respect Russia's sovereignty, on the basis that they do not recognize the Crimea to be a part of Russia. Therefore, they do not recognize any violation of the airspace of Russia as having taken place." Well, the Russians are right there. Rather, they would contend that the American aircraft in question were flying within the sovereign territory of the Ukraine, with the permission of the government, with the only legitimate authority to grant or refuse such permission, namely the government of, and please again, folks, it's the Ukraine in the English language, just like it's the Netherlands and the United Kingdom. Nevertheless, the Russians have made it clear that they consider the Crimea to be a sovereign part of Russia. The Russians have made diplomatic protests over what they see as a violation of their territory. The Americans have ignored them. The Russians have therefore shot down and listen to this, in one case, commandeered and landed these aircraft, making incursions into their sovereign territory. Now, let me stop right there before continuing. Remember the USS Donald Cook incident, all right? Remember the recent Russian blackout of NATO communications over Syria, all right? Just hold on to that. An act of war has been committed by America against Russia, and if you accept the American position, an act of war has been committed by Russia against both the Ukraine, and thank you for the there, folks, and the United States. Shots have been fired, and the Americans have lost material. Note that these are not exchanges of fire through proxies, as happened throughout the Cold War and is happening now through Syria and the East in the east of the Ukraine. No, these are two nuclear armed powers already in the process of shooting at each other. Are we already in the opening stages of World War III? How many minutes to midnight is the nuclear clock? May God help us all. And that's the way the Russian article ends. Now, like the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, I don't think we're anywhere close to World War III. I think that there are elements enough of restraint, at least in Russia, self-evidently, if not this country, that would pull back from that. But what really gets me here is the argument that my friend made in an op-ed piece that, well, Russia is a pushover, military pushover for the United States. It cannot possibly be anywhere near capable of defending itself. It doesn't even spend all the money on American on defense that America does. Now, folks, I got to be honest with you. I find this specious for a number of reasons. And those of you who've been following my published work where I've been arguing about a hidden system of finance to support the Black Project's research of what essentially has become a breakaway civilization, I think will follow my reasoning here. Because if you have maintained a Black Project's research infrastructure for several decades and sustained it with trillions of dollars of money over time, that entity and that hidden system of finance will begin to take on a life of their own and perhaps even pull away and become more or less quasi-independent of the host state hosting them, namely the United States. And thus, you cannot, in my opinion, measure the actual operational capability of the United States military in either nuclear or conventional terms. In other words, the military technology and operational doctrine that we're familiar with, and use that as a fair gauge of what the United States military may or may not do when confronted by a great power like Russia that happens to also be a nuclear power. There's two things I want to point out here. If you're spending enormous amounts of money on exotic technologies, you're also pumping enormous amounts of money into the more public defense programs. So what do we have right now? I think it's the F-35. We have a fighter that costs millions of dollars and doesn't perform as advertised. It's unlikely that the equivalent Russian fighter costs them as much to do effectively the same job. So in other words, you cannot measure American capability simply in terms of the amount of dollars spent, because what you're doing is you're inflating the defense economy. So Russia may be getting a lot more bang for the buck, and I suspect is, and it's incidents like this, the apparent commandeering of a very sophisticated U.S. drone and landing it in the capital of the Crimea, Simferopol. This is an incident that, along with the Donald Cook incident, along with the capture of a drone by Iran a few years ago, you'll recall that one, and along with the blackout, apparent capability to blackout technology, plus the fact that now Russia has deployed a new ICBM that can fire anywhere in the world and follow any trajectory. Please note that. No longer is it coming over the Arctic Ocean. It can take any trajectory it wishes, and the warheads, which are MIRVed, can be altered in flight. Now, this is a very sophisticated ICBM, in other words. So it appears to me that Russia has been sending us signals. We've got a Black Projects world too, and this is just the stuff we're willing to share with you, all right, and show you what we can do. I have to wonder, in this context, if the United States military is as ready for confrontation with Russia as many of the neocon pundits and op-ed writers have been opining in recent weeks. I would say my guess would be no. And there's one final comment I want to make in that regard, and that is the U.S. military has basically, since the end of World War II, been gradually slipping into a mode of operational doctrine where it has been confronted with opponents of a very different variety than those of a great power, and increasingly opponents fighting asymmetrical and guerrilla warfare. How would that military adjust? to a full-on confrontation with the Russian military, that remains to be seen. So I would urge you on the basis of stories like this to be a little less eager to jump on the bandwagon that Russia's a big pushover, and assess the costs of inflation in our own defense budget. Are we getting the bang for the buck that the defense contractors are telling us? And indeed, are we even given full access to the technologies that have been developed? Russia's sending a signal here that maybe we need to reassess the whole edifice. And that's it, folks, for our news and views from the day. And I'll see everybody on the flip side. Don't forget, tomorrow we've got a members vid chat at 7:30. I've already had some questions submitted, so I hope I'll see everybody for that. And I'll see everybody next week on the flip side. God bless.